Okay, so another day on arrays. We are picking up where we left off. In fact, if you followed along pretty well from where we were, then you could probably just keep the file that you had last time we were together. But if you're not quite sure that you're right on top of things, go ahead and download the file that I have here for today. This is exactly where we left off, except I just kind of filled out these images here. So I have the whole distance array built here on a spreadsheet just so we can see it and we can use it as we're talking through the problem that we're trying to solve. So go ahead and open up then the solution from where we left off, and let's talk back through the problem that we're trying to solve. Let's remember the problem that we're trying to solve, which is we are trying to calculate a route. We have some set of hotels. Here they are. The Sheraton, downtown Los Angeles. We've got one here in Salt Lake City, one in Phoenix, and some others here. We have road distances between each one of those. And so we have this distance grid here that says between hotel number 2 and hotel number 1, it is 653.2 miles. Hotel number 2 is the Sheraton in Phoenix. Hotel number 1 is the Sheraton here in Salt Lake City. And so we have the distances between each of those two. And so, we talked about how this is a really difficult problem to solve and be sure that we have the shortest distance, but we're going to implement an algorithm that was suggested here, which is called the next nearest hotel algorithm. We're going to start in Salt Lake City. We're going to figure out which the closest hotel is to Salt Lake City. We're going to go there. And then from there, we'll say, what's the closest hotel we haven't been to yet? And then we'll go there. What's the closest hotel we haven't been? And that's how we're going to build our route. And so far, really all we did last time we were together was we got the problem set up. We built a hotel array with the names of the hotels. We got that populated. We built a route array, and we filled the route array with what? Do you remember? The route array is where we're going to be putting the numbers of the hotels to say in the order that we're going to go. And so I've kind of pre-filled the first part of the problem here. So we're going to start in Salt Lake City. That's number 1. Next, we're going to go to Las Vegas. That's number 7. Then we're going to Sheraton Suites Fairplex. That's somewhere in Los Angeles area. That's number 12. Then we're going to 19 and so forth. But but what did that, when we declare that array, what data type was it of? Do you remember? Let's go look at the code. So we declared the array as module level variables, and it's an the route is an integer. And so what's the default value for any integer variable? It's going to be zeros. And so the problem, and we talked about what the problem would be if we had zeros here in the route array to start with. What does that mean? What does a 0 in some place of this route mean? It means go to hotel number 0 at this location. And so even though we hadn't run into the problem yet, we said, hey, let's go ahead and pre-fill this with -1s, and we're going to see where that would be a problem today. We then finished off by saying, let's go ahead and build a square array that has all of the distance data. So we can just either pick a single row or a single column and be able to read across that row and say, this is all of the distances between the referent hotel and the other hotels. Okay, and so that's basically where we got. And it probably would be helpful for us to just kind of look through the code and just kind of talk through the code that we had here in initializing arrays. First thing, someone tell me, even back up just a little bit more. Somebody tell me what an array is. Remember that in the English language, just as in any programming language, an array by itself doesn't mean anything. It's got to be an array of something. So tell me what an array is in terms of VBA. Go ahead. Yeah, variables is the thing. It's a series of variables. And so I've got this collection or this organized list of variables that I'm working with. And so when I say dim hotel, and I put these 2 parentheses here, and I don't put a number in there, I'm making what's called a dynamic array. Of course, remember that we could put the number we want in here right here, 35. And then we're saying we want those 36 variables, numbers 0 through 35, to be created at this point right at the beginning. But that would be a static array, but we're making these dynamic arrays, and so when we start running the code, we are figuring out how many hotels there are by looking over to the worksheet, and then we are redimming those dynamic arrays to the size that we want them to be. And so this just finds where the last hotel is on our list back on our spreadsheet, and then we subtract 1 off of that number to figure out to set the size, because if we want 36 elements in the array, what number do we give it? We give it 35. We give it the top index, because arrays, unless we otherwise configure it, arrays are going to start counting at 0. So we go ahead and get our 3 arrays configured, and those are the arrays that I've shown here. 1-dimension array of strings, a 1-dimension array of integers, and a 2-dimension array of singles, so floating point numbers. So somebody tell me kind of what's the big difference between a 1-dimension array and a 2-dimension array in terms of how we reference it. A 1-dimension array takes the name of the array and what? A number, an index, to say which of all these variables that we want. And so here I've got 36 variables. I just give it a number of 0 to 35, and that's what I'm talking about. But for a 2-dimension array, I now have 36 times 36 variables. So how do I refer to them? Yeah, now it takes 2 indices, one for each dimension. And so it's not like I get this long list that I can just refer to with a single index. If I've got a 2-dimensional array, I always have to provide 2 indices to say, and you can think of it as which row I'm interested in and which column to get to the individual variable. And of course, we're looking at them here on a spreadsheet. They're not really ranges on a spreadsheet. This is just so we can think about them, because they're non-visual. It's allocated memory. It's just locations in memory. Okay, so questions on kind of the setup to where we are? Okay, so that gets the arrays set up. We then just said for our 2 1-dimension arrays, we've got a loop that just loops from 0 to the number of hotels we have -1, and we're just reading data for the hotels. We're just reading data off the worksheet. So we're using our control variable both to change the position in the array that we're referring to, as well as to figure out which cell we're trying to refer to on the worksheet, and we're just reading the data off the worksheet, putting it into the array. Why did we do that? Why not just leave the data on the worksheet? Because we're learning about arrays. That's the point here. Yeah, could we do this just on the worksheet? Yes, we can do all of this just on the worksheet. But this is an example that we're trying to understand how to use arrays. Okay, and then here we're just putting a constant value into the route array, every element in the route array. And then here is the part that we finished off very quickly at the end of class last time. And so this probably makes sense for us to spend a little more time going through this nested loop here. And so this is common. I have a 2-dimension array, and I've got to get to every single one of the elements in that array. And so I'm going to have a control variable that goes across 1 dimension, and within that loop, I'm going to have another loop that goes across the other dimension. So let's just kind of, in fact, I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and I'm going to run this code up to this point. Okay, so right now I haven't set y to 0 yet, but that's what it is. So I'm going to step through this with F8. Right, so now we have set y to 0, and now we're setting x to what? Yeah, so x is going to be 1. So the first time we write here, we're writing through our distance array at 0, 1. Now, we have now skipped that very upper left-hand corner, 0, 0. Why are we skipping it? What value is at 0, 0 in my data? Yeah, it's 0. And what value is already, if I look at anywhere in this array at this point, what value is everywhere? 0 is everywhere because it's a numeric data type. The variables in this array, they're all singles. They're all already starting off at 0. And so we don't really need to look at 0 at anywhere along the diagonal because it's already 0. So we're saying the first place that we're going to be writing the value is going to be row number 0, column number 1. And then we're reading the analogous position off of our distance spreadsheet to get that value. And then you'll see our next line, we're writing that same value somewhere else in the array. Where are we writing it? Yeah, the inverse position of the array. We're just flipping the indices here in the array and then writing that same value into it. And so when we write to 1, 0, we're going to also write that same value to 0, 1. And that's what's going to give us the symmetrical characteristic of this array. So the point is that our original data, we only have the numbers on part of the array. This is just blank down here. And as we're building that array, we want it to be completely filled up. And so that's where we are, and that's where we left off. I had entered a couple of lines in here that were just helping me to kind of build this sheet here so we could look at it. And so I'm going to remember to get rid of these 2 lines in my code. In fact, I may just go ahead and delete those. This is kind of sloppy code because I haven't told it which worksheet I'm writing a value to. And so what worksheet will it be? Yeah, whatever's active. And so if I have the different sheet active, I'll write right over the top of my data. So let's make sure that we get rid of those 2 lines if you've got those in your code, if you copied the workbook down from Learning Suite, or if you had those from last time. So we should be able to run that the rest of the way through. I'm going to, I've got to stop right here. This is just printing some data out. So at this point, when I hit that stop, we have filled up those arrays. So I should be able to look at hotel number 7. That should be the Las Vegas hotel. I should be able to look at anywhere in the route, and it should be -1. And I should be able to look at a distance. Now, so let's go ahead and look at distance row number 1, column number 0. This should be between Salt Lake and that one in somewhere down in LA. And about 691 miles. And if we flip those indices, it should give us the same number. So 0, 1, same number. If I go to 0, 2, should be a different number between Los Angeles and whatever number 2 is. I don't know. Okay, so at this point, we really haven't started to solve the problem. All we've started to do is we've just got our data structured the way we'd like to see it. So questions on the setup. Are we ready to move forward with actually solving the problem? So this really is a pretty good example of when we kind of start to solve a problem with code, we really don't have that many tools to work with. We'll just kind of list off what they are really quickly. Number 1, we can store a value in memory and call it back. Number 2, we can do comparisons. We can say, is this greater than this? Or is this equal to this? So we can do comparisons between values. Number 3, we can do branching. We can say, based on some condition, we can execute some code or not execute some other code. Number 4, we can do math. So we can take, add things together. And those are really kind of the basic fundamental things that you've got in any programming environment. And you've got to figure out how to take whatever problem you're trying to solve and somehow fit it into that set of possibilities. And so that's what we've got to do for solving our problem. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this stop here. Don't need that. This is where we're printing this stuff out. You know what? I probably don't need all this debug print either. I'm going to get rid of all this debug printing in the stop. So now we're just loading up initializing those arrays. All right. So we have now already, I'll go ahead and either run this out or stop, but now we already have a sub-procedure here, calc route. So we're ready to do this. We're ready to start calculating our route. So I think our assumption is going to be we're going to start in Salt Lake City. So somebody give me the VBA code that says start in Salt Lake City. How do I tell, based on the way I've got this problem set up, how do I say start in Salt Lake City? Any thoughts? Go ahead. Okay, so if we know the hotel name, we can just kind of loop through the hotel list and find out where that one is. I'm going to assume that we already know the number of the Salt Lake. We already know that Salt Lake City Hotel is number 1. And so how do we say into our route, or we're building somehow a route, how do we say that's where we're starting? Go ahead. Okay, good. So we don't have to use set because they're just variables, and so we'll refer to it. We could use the keyword let, or we could just say that position in the array equals 1. So that's the key thing. So this index here, index number 1, is the index of the hotel we're starting at, and so it's hotel number 1, and we're going to put it somewhere in our route array. Now it's going to be the first location, but the index of the first location is 0. So we're going to say route sub 0 equals 1, and that's how we're going to get started here. So great, start at Salt Lake City, LSC, Salt Lake City. Route sub 0 equals 1. Whew, that was easy. Now we got to tell it to figure out the next location. This part's easy too. Route sub 1 equals, and now we're going to have something where we can say, go figure out what the next city is going to be. Why don't we or the next hotel. Let's just call it next hotel. And I'm going to go ahead, and you don't have to, if you're not, this is a function. We haven't created the function yet. We're going to have to create a block of code that can figure out what the next hotel is. And it's going to return the index value of the hotel that it found. Now, it turns out in VBA, if you call a function and you don't need to pass it any parameters, you're not going to pass any arguments, you don't have to put the parentheses. But folks, it's helpful to put the parentheses in there because then when you look at the code, you go, oh, that's not a variable. That is a call to a function. It's just helpful to see it there. But it would work without those parentheses. All right, but now we've got to create the next hotel algorithm. So but it's going to be a function, so let's come down in here and make it. Function, next hotel. Okay, so talk me through it. We now know we have been to Salt Lake City, and now, given that information, we've got to figure out what the next hotel is. There's actually, before we talk through that algorithm, there's a couple of different ways that we could approach this. We could either say, all right, next hotel, you got to figure out where we currently are in the problem, or we could send down, as a parameter, we could send down the hotel that we're currently at. We could do kind of either one of those. Every other time I've taught this example, I've said, let's send down the hotel that we're at. So we're currently at 1, we'll send down a 1 here. I'm kind of bored doing it that way. So instead, let's have next hotel figure out where we are. So let's just solve that part of the problem. Let me go ahead and go back to kind of where we are right now. So at this point, here's where we are. This is what our route looks like. So how could we figure out, we need a general way to figure out where we are in the route. Any thoughts? Go ahead. So we could start at the top, and we could keep going until we find a -1. Well, you said it's kind of slow. That will be blindingly fast. I mean, that will take half a millisecond. Won't take very long at all. Yeah, I can't think of a better way to do it, actually. Although we'll do it a different way. It's kind of equally good as yours, but I want to give you a little practice with a syntax we haven't seen yet in class. So instead, what I'm going to do is, so you said start at the top and go down until we find a -1. I'm going to say no. Let's start at the bottom and go up until we find something bigger than -1. Why are we doing it that way? Just so I can show you how to go backwards with a loop. We haven't done that yet with a for loop. So let's go ahead and do it. But it's exactly as good as the solution that you gave. Okay, so to do that, we are going to need a variable to control the loop. Let's just call it x, dim x as an integer. Now, if we were trying to start x off at the lowest index, we would say for x equals 0 to something. But now we want to start at the top and go down. So we're going to go from something to 0. But now here's the question. Where are we going to start? We're going to start at 35, but we don't want to say 35 because we've set this problem up to be dynamic. If we change the number of hotels in our grid, we want this thing to automatically change. So how are we going to do it? So we had up here, we had a variable called hotel count. When we were initializing these arrays, we said we've got to figure out what the hotel count is so we can initialize these arrays. What's the problem with where we have hotel count set up? Yeah, it's a local variable. It's only available because I declared it inside this subprocedure. It's only available inside this subprocedure. So we've got two options. One is we can pull hotel count out and we can put it as a module level variable. That's a pretty good approach. But it turns out it's really easy to ask an array how big it is. And so let's just do that. It give us a little more practice with a different approach. So I'm going to say for x equals the upper bound, u bound. And I just tell it the array I'm interested in this case, route. So the other way is, you remember, you counted it to find out that there's going to be the hotel count. I was going to have the hotel count, but this will just be the upper bound, so I won't have to subtract 1 off of this. as I would with a hotel count. But this just says what's the upper boundary of the route. That works great for a single dimension array. If I have a multiple dimension array, 2, 3, 4 dimensions, then I have to give it a second argument here, which dimension I'm interested in. But a one dimension array, you don't have to supply that. So that will give me 35. Now, when I get down here to next, what does next do? So next, the bottom of the loop says go back to the top, but it also does something else. What else does it do? It increments x. Let's think about how this would start. So we're going to go for x equal to 35 to 0. So starting off at 35, we're going to get to next, and it's going to be 36 because it increments it, unless we tell it to count by a different number. And that's what we do here, step -1. So step over here says, what are we going to add to the control variable when we hit next? So that's the part. Without that, it'll try to count up. That'll be a problem. Okay. So far, so good. Let's just, to make sure that we've got this working, let me go ahead and do a debug.print in here. I'm going to print x, and I'm going to print route sub x. And let's see. And I'm going to run my calc route. So we'll run that one. I get subscript out of range. That's no good. Calc route is going to need to call my initialize arrays. So because first thing I've got to get all these arrays built. So I've got this thing init arrays. I'm going to make sure that calc route starts by calling that other procedure. Clear out my immediate window, run that again. And here's what I got. So we're starting here at 35. There's a -1, 34, -1, 33, -1. We're counting down, all the way down. We get to 1, -1. We finally get to number 0, and that's where we've plugged in the 1. Looks pretty good. Questions? How are we doing so far? We're good? Okay, so now that was just to make sure that this array is behaving the way that I think it should be behaving. And this loop is handling that array correctly. That looks good. So now I'm going to put some if condition here. I'm looking at every single value in that array, and I'm going to say if what? Help me out here. What condition am I looking for? If something's greater than -1, so greater than -1, then, but what am I looking for to be greater than -1? Well, if x is going to be greater than 1 the very first time I hit it, and every time I hit it, because x is going to go from 36 to 0 counting backwards. So looking at x, I'm never going to find it. Well, x is always going to be greater than -1. So route sub x, right? I'm trying to look into this array, and what is there at the number 11 position? Nope, that's not greater than -1. What's the number? That's not greater than -1. We get all the way to the 0. Finally, that's greater than -1. And that'll tell us that's the city that we're currently at. And so I'm looking for route sub x greater than -1. And if. I guess I don't really need this debug.print in here anymore, so I'll get rid of that. What am I going to do? When I'm counting up from the bottom until I bump into something that's not that default value I set, what do I look for? What do I do in that case? All I need to do is remember it. I've got to remember, I'm currently at Salt Lake City. That's where I'm trying to find the distances from Salt Lake City. So I have to remember that value that we found. So let me go ahead and dim current hotel as an integer. And when we find one, when we find one that's less than or that's greater than -1, that's going to be our current hotel. So current hotel equals what? Route sub x. It's the value that we have in the number x variable in our array. So we now have figured out the hotel that we're trying to find the distances from. Whew. be kind of boring at this point because it's just going to be 1. It's the value that we plugged in here. But now that's important. Why is knowing that important? Why do we have to know the hotel that we're currently at? Well, we know where to plug in the next one. That's because we're kind of building that up here. We haven't generalized this to be a loop, but we're plugging that in at route number 1. We weren't trying to find out where to put it. We're trying to find out the hotel number that we're at. We're trying to find out Salt Lake City. Why do we have to know Salt Lake City? Because we have to go through the distance array and find the shortest distance from Salt Lake City that we haven't been to yet. And so now that we've gotten that 1 here, we can now say, great, this is the only part of our array that we're interested in. It's all these numbers that are on row number 1. Or, actually, it's easier to do it this way. Column number 1. We can go down the column. It's the same data, row and column. So now we've got that. We've isolated this whole distance array, and we're saying this is the only part we have to look at. It is column number 1. All right. And so great, we've got our current hotel. And so now we'll make another loop. Now we've got to go across that whole row or that whole column. I don't care which one it is. So for x equals 0 to the upper boundary of our array, u-bound. We could just do this with the route. We could just say the upper boundary of route. But let's go ahead and do it this way so you can see it as, for a multiple dimension array, distance, comma 1. So dimension number 1, dimension 1 and dimension 2 both have just, it's square, so they're both 35. But this is just to show you that a multidimensional array, you have to specify the dimension you're interested in. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the comment here is, well, wait, hold on, there's a problem here because if we find that, let's do this. Let's get our 7 back in here so we can see what's going to happen. But no, you're absolutely right. So let me put here 7. And let's think what happens if we're the way we had that loop before. So -1, greater than -1, no. Greater than -1, no. Greater than -1, no. Greater than -1, yes! So right here, you can barely see that highlighted, I guess, but we found it. Great. Well, what happens? Great, we set current hotel, we come to the next, it comes back up here, it subtracts 1 off of it, and so now we look at here, greater than -1? Yes. So you're absolutely right, I missed this point. So what we have to do? Yeah, as soon as the first time we hit this, we're done with this loop. So inside this if, we'll say exit 4. Otherwise, it would always, the way that we're structuring this, building this from the top down, it would always return the index of the first city. Thanks for pointing that out. It would have been embarrassing when it ran this, and it kept saying, go to Las Vegas next, go to Las Vegas next, go to Las Vegas. Okay. So now we're going to be going across this. Let me just go ahead and put a debug.print in here. I'm just going to print x. And I'm also going to print distance. I want to see the set of distances I'm working with. Okay, so distance sub x, comma, what? Let's put 1 in there for now. So someone said 1. Let's go ahead and print that and let's see what it does. So I'm going to run that. And that should spool off a bunch of distances. So 0, 653. Does that look right? 0, 653. Got the 6. There's a 653. Did I miss one before it? Let me go ahead and clear that off and run it again. Oh, there we go. 691, 0, 653. 691, 0, 653. That's good, but it's not general. What do we want to put here? So it's 1 this time, but on my next time through this, I'm going to be asking for all the distances between Las Vegas and everything else. Go ahead. So the question is, hey, where's this number coming from? And these distance numbers, where are they coming from? So let's just go back and take a look at how we've set the problem up. Let's look at the picture here. So we've got, this is a graphical representation of the array in memory. So we have a structure in memory called distance. It's got a potload of variables. How many does it have? I don't know. It's got 36 times 36. There are 1,296 variables in this array. And that's the values that we have them here. So we're accessing them not off the worksheet here. This worksheet is just so that we can see it. Somewhere in memory we've got that set up. And that's what we did when we said, hey, we're going to calculate this route. We're starting off by getting our arrays full of information. And that's what, in our calc route, that's what this nested loop does. It reads the information off of the worksheet, the distance worksheet, and it plugs it into an array called distance. So by the time this runs, we've got those 1,200 variables in memory organized in a nice orderly fashion so that we can go give it 2 indices and say we're going after one of those numbers. Does that answer the question? Okay. So now I forgot the other question I was trying to ask when you asked that question. Anyone come up with the answer to that one and remember the question? Oh yeah. So right now, no matter how this runs, we're always going to be looking at column 1. So we've got some way to say, oh, we're trying to find the difference from Salt Lake City, put in a 1. Oh, we're trying to find the difference from Las Vegas, put in a 7. What is that? We've defined that right up here somewhere. We've already, that's the first step we did. We had to figure out which hotel we're at. So yeah, that was the point of this whole loop, was to find out what was the most recently added hotel to the loop. And so we remembered that number inside current hotel. So instead of always looking at Salt Lake here, we're going to look at current hotel. URRENTHOTEL. Question? So the point is that we're figuring out what's the most recently added hotel to our route, and then we're saying, remember that. If it's a 7, remember that so that we can just concentrate on column number 7. So because this is the distance between the Las Vegas property and every other property that we're interested in. And so we're figuring out what the most recently added hotel to our route is, and then we're saying only focus on that part of this array. And so we're saying we're going from 0 to 35. We're looking at column number 7 or column number 1, whichever one we're currently looking at, and then we're having access to all the distances from that particular property. This is not simple. This is not a simple thing that we're doing here. But I'm hoping that you're at least following it. How many of you are saying, I think I'm following this? How many of you are going, I am so lost, I'm glad he's recording? There's a couple here. All right, try to stick with us and feel it, and hopefully it'll click. If not, let's spend some time one-on-one or with TAs. Okay, so we can see that I've got now access to all these numbers. So my next trick is, my next step is, I don't want all of these numbers. Which numbers do I want to exclude out of this set? The ones that are from properties that we've already been. So we need some way to say, all right, I'm currently considering this number here, 691. Is this a number I should be considering? Now, how do we know if it's a number we should be considering? If it's a property that's already in the route, it's off limits. So we need something to tell us, is this a property we've been to already? And so let's pause on making the next hotel function and make another function that will just answer the question, is it a property we have been to? So I'm going to come down here below next hotel and make another function. Function. I'll call it been there. And in this one, I am going to pass it a hotel. So hotel index. Maybe we'll just call it hotel. Now, what type do we want? That's going to be as an integer. And what type do we want this function to return? Say it again. Now this one, probably not integer. I'm not going to tell it a number, all I want to answer the question, I'm going to send it down a number, 7. And I want it to tell me somehow whether I've been there or not. We could do it with an integer, but another choice would be Boolean. Yeah, just tell me true or false. Been there, true, been there, false. So we'll say as Boolean. This one's not too bad. I wonder if we should do it as a little exercise. How many of you think you could actually write this function that would just report, have we been there yet? Return true or false. Probably not enough to spend on a class exercise. So let's go ahead and walk through it. So in order for us to know if we've been there, we have to look through the route array and see if the number that we pass down is already in the route. If I pass down a 7, how do we know if we've been there? It's in the route. I'm just going to look through every element in that array. I've got to look through all 36 of those variables and say, does one of those equal 7? So I'm going to declare a variable to control my loop, dim x, as an integer. For x equals 0 to the upper boundary of my route. Okay, so at this point, I have a loop that's just going to count x from 0 to 35. So now I just want to say if route, looking into my route, I'm looking at one of those variables in my route array, route sub x is equal to what? What am I checking for? So I'm looking at the first element in my route. I want to know if the value in that variable, that location in my route, if that value is equal to what? Yeah, if it's equal to the hotel number that I passed down. I'm just checking to see it. I'm going through every single one of these. I want to see if the value in there is the one that I passed down. So if route sub x is equal to hotel, then we're going to do something. What are we going to do? Yeah, we're just going to, we found it. It's there. So we just got to tell it to return true. And the way we do that is by setting the name of the function equal to true. Now, hopefully, once it finds it, it's not going to find it again anywhere else in the route. Hopefully, we have hotel in the route only once. And in fact, let's suppose even if a hotel was in the route twice. What would it mean if we found it again? Would we return really true? It's extra true? It's doubly true? What could you possibly return? Right? Once it's there, we know we've been there. There's no reason to keep looking. So what do we do here? We could exit function. We're done. Or we can exit for. What's the difference? Well, because there's no code between the end of the loop and the end function, either one will do exactly the same thing. So I prefer to say exit for. I don't know. Jumping all the way out of the function seems so harsh to me. I don't know why that seems harsh, but it seems harsh. Anyway, so we'll exit for. So let's think about this. Are we ever setting this thing to false? There's no line of code here that sets it to false. Why not? It's the default value. And so if we don't ever set it to true, it's going to return false. So unless we find a match between the number we passed down and some part of our array that we're looking forward to, we'll never hit true, and instead it'll return false. So let's, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a breakpoint right up here. So come up here to our next hotel. I'll put a breakpoint before we get to this, and I want to run the code. Oh, I want to run not next hotel. I want to run calc route. Okay. So at this point, I should be able to ask been there. So let me just come to my immediate window. Been there 1 should return true. Should find it. Been there 2 should return false, because 2 is not. The only thing I've got there is negative 1s and 0s. Now, turns out negative 1 isn't really a hotel, but would this thing work if I put a negative 1 here? Yep, it should, because it's just looking for this value in my array somewhere. Well, I'm not sure that's even worth bringing up, but the whole point is that all of our possible values, right now, the only one that's in the route at this point is 1. Any other number we put in, 35, is going to return false. So now we can just ask if we've been there. We feel okay with that loop? It's kind of Kind of a simple little function here. Just looks across every variable in the array. Do we find a match? If so, return true. It's a property we've been to. By the way, if we're coming along and your code is not running, and you don't see why it is, remember we've got Parker here, so raise a hand, ask for a TA, and we'll send him around. Some help right here. We'll go ahead and pause and let's pause and make sure we're all up to speed here. Okay, so let me hit stop right here. Now nothing is loaded into memory. Everything is just, I've released all of my variables into the wild. Now, if I just try to run this function, if I just try to call this function from here, it's going to say, great, we're going to try to find out this. We're going to try to find out what the upper boundary of this array is. And at this point, what's the upper boundary of that array? Well, it's a module level variable called route, but how big is it? It's uninitialized. Until we run the line right here that redims that route array and gives it some size, that array doesn't even exist yet. Those variables have not been allocated into memory yet. And so for me to be able to, anytime I want to say, hey, I want to look and see what's in memory at this point, I've got to be in what mode? Break mode. I got to have that yellow arrow somewhere. And I've got to make sure that the code has run to load this stuff into memory. And so for us to be able to check to see if we actually have been there, we've got to do a couple of things. Number one, we've got to initialize that array. And number two, we've got to have executed this one. Right? We've got to say put 1 into the first position here. And then we want to say now suspend that in memory at that point. So I could do it right here. I could put a breakpoint there, run the code to here. Now I've got the yellow line here. Everything is run. It's called initialize arrays. It's filled all the information into the arrays. I've put 1 here into my route. And so now I should be able to ask been there 1, and it should tell me that it's been there. Been there any other number, and it should tell me it hasn't been there. So the question is, did that work for you? Still not there. Let me pause. We'll get there, then we'll move on. I'm going to go ahead and stop my code here, take the breakpoint off. Okay, so when we calc route, we're dropping in number 1 that says start in Salt Lake, and then we're saying call our next hotel. So next hotel does what? Next hotel figures out which hotel we're currently working on by finding the most recently added hotel to the array, and then it uses that one to iterate across the distance array across one of the dimensions. So we'll still have x going from 0 to 35, but we have fixed the second dimension here, so we're going just across that one vector of numbers. Okay, but now we have created a function been there that can tell us if the hotel that we're currently considering, x, if that's one that we have, wait a minute, we don't need to know if we've been there, we need to know if we haven't been there. Ugh. So we could create a function called haven't been there, or we could just invert the value that comes back. So if been there is true, that's one we don't want to consider. So let's do this. Let's say if been there, pass it x, the index we're currently considering, we could say if that equals false, then that's a possible location to go to. See that okay? Because if been there returns true, if we've been there, that's one we don't want to come into. We only want to come in when been there returns false. By the way, folks, this is identical to writing it this way. If not been there. Because if been there sub x returns true, we don't want to go in here. So we only want to go in there when this is false. And so if this is false and not false, then is true. So when been there is false, this whole expression will evaluate to true. To satisfy my curiosity, which of these two approaches do you prefer? Been there equals false or not been there? Who says been there equals false? I like it better. Who says, no, I like not been there better? Just a couple of you. Interesting. I like not been there better. Probably just because it reads like more like English. If not been there, then. But you know, I'm flexible to go either way. So I'll leave this as the comment for instruction and go back to the one that more of you are comfortable with. But they really are completely identical to each other. All right. Now, what are we going to do if it's someplace, we now know we are looking at a distance to a hotel that we have not yet been to. What do we want to do? Okay, we're trying to find the shortest distance, but unfortunately, we don't have the ability to say, just tell me the shortest, right? Excel's got a function, min, right? Just find the minimum distance in this segment. It's not quite sophisticated enough to say, find the minimum distance that we haven't been to, but we can't just say, find the minimum out of this set. We've got to look one at a time. And so, when we look at the first one, we think, okay, this could be the shortest one. We need to remember this is possible. Could we find the shortest distance on the very first one we look at? We could. So we got to do a couple things. We got to say, oh, this is our possibly our shortest distance, and we got to remember where we saw it. What hotel did we find it at? So let's give ourselves a couple more variables to work this problem. I'll declare these back at the top for next hotel. I'm going to say dim, I'll call it short distance as a single, because it's going to actually be the distance that I found. And why don't I dim short hotel, I'll call it near hotel, as an integer. That'll let me remember the hotel the hotel number that corresponds to the small distance that I've found. Now the trouble is, I've got to give this short distance some value to start. I want some value in here. So in fact, let's do this. Okay, so now we know this is a property we haven't been to. It's one I should be considering. So now the next question is, if the distance that I'm looking at if that distance is less than my current short distance contender, then we're going to do something. Probably haven't spelt it. So the comment is I spent short two different ways. And no, I didn't spell it right the one time. Okay, so shore is short distance as single. Reminds me of a story that was very embarrassing in class. Do you want to hear it? Sure. We were doing, this is back in the day when you turned things in on floppy diskettes. Oh, this is not yet quite before you were born, but this was like 1998. Anyone here born after 1998? A couple of you? John, you were not, stop. Anyway, we were turning in some access database that wouldn't quite fit on a floppy diskette unless you were sure to compact the database. And then you had to zip it. You had to do a zip archive. That's easy. It's part of the operating system now. You just right-click and say add to a compressed folder and you're done. But back then, in the late 90s, you had to have other software. It was freeware. It was free software or shareware. And about half the class had no idea what I was talking about when I said, let's zip it and it'll fit on a floppy. And so I said, okay. Someone says, you can get, I think at the time the software was WinZip or PKZip or something. And the student said to me, you can get it at shareware.com. So I went to, in class, I typed in shareware.com, only I left the E off of share and I went to shareware.com, which is a hardcore pornography site. Right there in class. This wasn't here. BYU, I feel protected. You type in a bad address here, you don't have to worry about it going somewhere you don't want to go. This was the University of Minnesota, of whom robes I'm wearing today. So I'll let you know, even after this event, they let me graduate. I was still a student when I was teaching the class. I tried to leave that site. I hit back. It wouldn't let me go back. I tried to close the browser. It wouldn't let me close the browser. I finally pulled the power out on the computer power cord, and everything went dark. The class thought it was hilarious. I thought for sure I'm going to get dismissed or something. I don't know. Anyway, Yeah, spelling's important, sometimes more than other. Okay. So now here's the trick. Somehow I've got, once my short distance gets a value, once I get a contender in here, this works great. I'm looking at a particular distance. If that is less than the shortest distance I've seen so far, that's my new shortest possible, that's my new contender, my new best contender. But I got to do something to get it started. So how am I going to, how do I give it some value to start with? I need something to say, I've my current shortest distance. Any thoughts on what to do? Kind of go back here and look at the data. So let's say I'm going from Salt Lake, which is this column here. How do I say, how do I get my short distance initialized to a value to start with? See what I have to do with short distance? I've got to, as I'm looking through these values, I want to find one that's smaller than the one that I've currently found. You know, I've currently found. And so, how do I start it? A little bit louder. Set it equal to the distance of the current hotel. Well, it turns out what I'm trying to do here is I've got the distance of the current hotel, and I'm trying to find out if it's shorter than what I've already found. So I can't set it equal to this one. Is that a stretch or a hand? Just okay. So the comment here is you could set it equal to, you could check to see if it's not 0 and greater and this is true. Or I like what you said before, set it equal to some really large number. It's bigger than any one you're going to come across. That way the first comparison you make, you're sure to pick that one up as the best contender. I like that approach a lot. So let's just come up here. We've just declared our variables here. Let's go ahead and set short distance equal to the circumference of the Earth, 24,000 miles. Our numbers are in miles. If I've got two hotels that the distance to drive to them is further than driving around the world, something's fishy. What's another? So I think this is a pretty good number here. What would be another really good number to use for this? Can't use a billion because, oh wait, short distance is an integer. Yeah, we could. We can go pretty large on this. Yeah, we could do something 3,000 miles. We're probably okay there, but the point is, it's got to be some number. The other option is to say, just plug in the largest number this variable can possibly hold. That's kind of another good one to do. It's not as easy with floating point numbers as it is for integers. So let's just go ahead and stick with 24,000. I'm still missing it here. Short distance. Oh, I'm missing a T here. Yes, T, that one. Whew. I guess I'm trying to avoid tea as well as coffee. Okay, so now let's think about the first time through. So our short distance is 24,000 miles. So now the first time we get through here, if been there, let's just think about this first comparison. So when x is 0, we look at our array here. Do we have 0 in our array anywhere? No, because we initialized it with -1s. So I haven't been there, so that's good. We're going to be able to make this comparison now. I haven't been there. Now I'm going to check to see if this number, 691, is less than short distance. What's short distance? 24,000. So this is going to be less than 24,000. So I now have found a new possible contender. I have a new possible contender. This is the shortest one. This is the closest one I've seen so far. I got to remember that. So what do? So we've got near hotel as an integer. We've got to remember this could be our nearest one. So near hotel equals what? Yeah, it's not going to be the 691. My near hotel is going to be index number that corresponds to that distance. It could be that hotel 0 at 691 miles is my closest hotel. So I'm going to say near hotel equals x. What else do I have to do here? I've got to update my short distance because that is now my new contender. Short distance equals the distance that I observed. Okay, so when x is 0, we're going to find 691 miles is my distance here. That is going to be shorter than my short distance, so we're going to remember the Hotel 0 could be my closest hotel, and now we're going to update short distance to be 691. Oop. Now we're going to come to next. X will get incremented. X will be 1. We're still not above the upper boundary. So we're going to come in there. If been there 1, what is this going to return? Been there sub 1. Let's look at our problem over here. Here we still have -1. So remember, been there is going to look across the route and ask if I've been to number 1. This is going to return true. And so as I look at this expression here, I'm going to have if true equals false, which is false. So I'm going to drop to the end if, come back up. X is now 2. If been there 2, been there 2 returns false. So I have false equals false, which is true. Now I'm checking to see if the distance I'm currently looking at is less than my short distance. My short distance is 691. The one I'm currently looking at is 653. And so the distance I'm currently looking at is shorter than my short distance. And so I now have a new possible hotel. Hotel number 2 is my next possible one. I'm going to remember that short distance. So short distance now becomes 653. I make the next comparison. Is this one smaller? No. This one? No. This one? Yes. So we'll feed back through the loop again, and we'll remember property number 5 now has 649. We go to this one. Shorter? No. We go to this one. Shorter? Yeah, 425. So we remember 7. And we will then continue looking through the rest of this, and we won't find another one that's shorter than 425. And so by the time we exit this loop, our near hotel is going to be hotel number 7. We will have found that hotel. That's pretty good news. What else do we have to do? We're writing a function right now called near hotel or next hotel. So we have to somehow tell it what to return. What is it going to return? For this case, what number will it return? This will return 7. So how do we tell it to return 7? Next hotel, set the name of the function equal to, well, 7 would do it, but we want it to be general. What's it going to be? Near hotel. It's not good. We don't want it to be x because remember, x is going to go all the way from 0 to 35 every single time. So x will actually end up as 36 when it comes out of the loop. So it's not going to be x, but near hotel is us keeping track of which hotel do we find the shortest distance to. And so by the time we've gone through that whole loop, then whichever was the last one that we bumped into should be the one that we're after. In this case, 7, that should return 7. Whew, I'm so excited. I am going to come back up here to calc route. I'm going to put a breakpoint on end sub, and I'm going to run. And so I'm now going to probe. I expect if I look at route sub 0, I should see a 1. But now if I look at route sub 1, what am I expecting? I'm expecting 7. Yeah, so that's there. If I look at route sub 2, what should I see? Yeah, -1. We haven't gotten to that part of the problem yet. So here's the point where some level of despair should settle in. We have now been at this for an hour and, well, a little bit more than an hour. And we've got the first step in the route. But the good news is, what's the next, how do I get the next route? How do I get the next step in the route? Route sub 2 equals what? Next hotel. I should be able to do that. I think it's either 12 or I think it's 12. Run that. Come up and ask for route 2, and that's got me the next leg in the route. This now looks pretty simple. What do? I just need a loop, yeah. So I'll declare, I'm going to go ahead and stop my code. I'm going to go ahead and declare another variable here to control my loop. Do it at the very top. Dim x as an integer. I need my route, I need start Salt Lake out of the loop, but the rest of these are just the same. For x equals 1 to the upper boundary of my route. Next. And now route sub x. If I run this now, it should give me a subscript out of range. Just try that again. Oh, I hit 51. I didn't want that. I just want to run this with F5. Looks like I've got more debug.print happening than I want to happen in there. But now I should be able to ask for any of those locations. Route sub 5 is hotel number 10. What hotel is hotel number 10? Well, that's easy. I've got the hotel there. Question mark hotel. Right? I've got an array with hotel names in it. Hotel sub 10. That's a Sheraton in Cerritos. Is the 11th stop in my route. Let me do that one more time so you can kind of see. I want you to, okay, if you're working on your code right now, I just want you to pause for a second, because what I'm about to show you is something that will hurt your head unless you've seen it and let me talk through it. You just look at this code after I've done it without letting me talk you through it. You'll be like, what's going on there? Okay, so let me plug this in again. I want to see what's at route number 6. So interesting that 6 happens. I don't want to do 6 because 6 sequentially, it's a coincidence that 11 comes after 10 and 6 comes after 5. Let's look at 7. There we go. So that's now route 8. What's the name? So this evaluates to 8. If I want to see which property is number 8, I have to go to a different array. I've got an array called hotel. And I pass it the 8. And it's going to tell me the name of the hotel. The Westin by the Los Angeles airport. But remember, this evaluates to what? That's 8. And so I can do this in one step by passing 8 to the hotel array this way. I want to know the hotel of the property in the 7th slot of the route. And that should return that same value. All right, now if your code's not working so well, you can go look at it. That's fine. The reason that's interesting is I need some way to report out the route that I'm going to. So I'm just going to make another loop for myself right here. For x now equals, for x equals 0 to the upper boundary of my route array. Debug.print. I'm going to go ahead and print this like a step number. Now this goes from 0 to 35, but I don't want the steps in my route to start at 0. I want them to go from 1 to 36. So what do I put here? X plus 1, comma, and then this thing right here, hotel sub route sub x. And that should now put for me the names of the hotels in the route that I'm building. Somewhere I've got a debug.print that's really slowing things down. I want to get rid of it. I'm not quite sure where it is. Is it in it? Is it in init? Here it is. This debug.print I want to get rid of. All right, stop my code, run it again. Oh, probably was on. I got to be on my calc route. I don't need my breakpoint here anymore. Let me go ahead and run that again. There we go. So now this has printed out the route that it's taking me. Let's just take a look and see if we agree. Okay, well, good. We're starting in Salt Lake. We're going to Las Vegas. So far, so good. We're going to Fairplex. I'm not quite sure where that is. But let's look at this next one. Anaheim, Cerritos. So Fairplex must be somewhere in, yes, definitely California, probably somewhere in the Los Angeles area, San Fernando Valley or somewhere around there. So this looks pretty good. Salt Lake, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Long Beach, that's Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, Los Angeles. Whew. Monarch Beach. Anyone from Los Angeles area? Monarch Beach, is that down there in Los Angeles? Newport Beach, but still kind of there, still Southern California. That looks pretty good. La Jolla. Now, this is my stomping ground, so I was raised in San Diego, so I recognize that. La Jolla is San Diego, San Diego, San Diego. So far, not so bad. We did a bunch of stuff around Los Angeles, now a bunch of stuff around San Diego. Palm Springs, that's, a little bit, more east from there. That's okay. And then Bakersfield, that's kind of Central California. So, so far, what would be a better route so far than Los Angeles down to San Francisco and then back up the coast? What would be better? Did I say San Francisco? Los Angeles, San Diego, and then back up north. Probably better to go to San Diego first and then come up, but this isn't so bad. San Diego, Palm Springs, Bakersfield, San Jose. So we're Northern California now. Silicon Valley, Pleasanton, San Francisco. This Montreal isn't really Montreal. It's somewhere in San Francisco. I'm not sure why the name's wrong, but pretty good. San Francisco, San Francisco, San Francisco. St. Francis. I don't know if that's a place or if that's a person, but that's kind of the San Francisco area. San Rafael, Sacramento. Not so bad. Seattle. I don't know where Santa's Hotel. Is that the North Pole? Oh, that's Santa. I don't know. But then where do we go? Scottsdale, Phoenix. We were pretty close to Phoenix when we were in Las Vegas. But why did we miss Phoenix? Because LA is closer to Las Vegas than Phoenix. And that's all we're considering. What's the next nearest route? So it's I really feel pretty good about the route until we finish up in San Francisco and we have to end up got to go all the way back down to Phoenix. So on the one hand, we've calculated a route, and it's a reasonable route, but you could have done better with a pencil. And yeah. But we worked through a lot of arrays on the way, so there you go. And remember, the point is, if you have to solve this problem thousands and thousands of times a day, doing it with a pencil and paper is not really an option. And this is like the simplest algorithm that gives you a reasonable output. So, questions here? That's it for arrays. And so if you're feeling still pretty shaky, oh, by the way, you've got what you need to do the next project, which we don't have time to talk about today. So let me kind of talk you through the next project when we get together on Wednesday. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed.